Hello, everybody, and welcome to Players of Games. Today we have Chris Molka.
Hello.
And Brandon. Hey, everybody. Tonight we're going to be talking about a series that both I and Chris have played before. It's a old series, but still a good one. It's the Ogre series, also known as the OgreBattle series.
The inspiration for Final Fantasy Tactics, despite that game becoming more popular because it slapped Final Fantasy on its name.
Yes. There can be many arguments had, but we'll be staying on topic and focusing on their three main title games, as well as talking a little bit on their two side story titles. So for those... Yes.
So for the one... I've played the first... So, in order of the release of the games, we had the first, which was OgreBattle, The March of the Black Queen. Which, do you remember how they got the title for the games?
No, March of the Black Queen, actually, I know the least about.
I haven't played it. I know a bit about it just through reading about it. But both OgreBattle and The March of the Black Queen are are names of songs by the
rock band. Yep.
Queen.
Mm-hmm. That was actually the one thing that I do know about them.
That always amazed me. So, original for the...
Yes, the first game that
Super
came out
Famicom
was OgreBattle, The March of the Black Queen. The second title that comes out is the Tactics Ogre, Let Us Cling Together, which was also originally came out on the Super Famicom. And then
has had remakes on the PS1 and PSP.
Yes. And after that came OgreBattle 64, Person of Lordly Caliber on the Nintendo 64. This was then followed by Legend of OgreBattle Gaiden, Prince of Zenobia, and Tactics
on
Ogre.
On the Neo Geo Pocket Color.
Yes, and then Tactics Ogre, the Knight of Lotus.
On the Game Boy Advance. Which, that game, the Knight of Lotus, was actually the game I started with. It looked interesting, and I was looking for good games, found it in a used game bin, bought it, and loved it. Which is why I then got into the Tactics Ogre, Let Us Cling Together, whereas you started with OgreBattle 64.
Yep. I was obsessed with 64 as a kid, and I played a lot of different games from it, but OgreBattle 64 was one of the ones that I came back to again and again. And let me tell you, none of these games were ported very, very well to English, and learning them and how the game's mechanics worked weren't usually that easy. A lot of searching for information, like the flipbook guides and all of that, talking to people, and then searching the internet. But, back in, the 2001, didn't have that great of internet anyways.
Yeah, that was the biggest thing. Before 2010 and the remake for Let Us Cling Together, there was about one site I knew I could go to for information on it, trying to play either the PS1 or the SNES version of it. But after the 2010 remake, they got a bit more traction, and decently sized couple pages with information. I know I have saved a HTML file of just random interesting facts and other information, because that's one of the things about these games is there is so much hidden within them.
Oh yes, and the best thing is the amount that's hidden is it is that vast, but you can totally go through the game without stepping on any of the side content that's hidden throughout it and still enjoy the game. It's really interesting because it's not one of those games where it's like, oh hey, here's your list of the special things you need to collect before you can get what you want if you're going for a completion. It has nothing to do with completion. All of the side stuff is just additive to your progression through the game. It doesn't actually change the story so significantly.
And I feel one of the big things that drew me to this series, when originally, again, starting with the Knight of Lotus, and then going into the other Tactics Ogre, which, to explain the difference between Tactics Ogre and OgreBattle, if it has tactics in the name, it plays more like, without wanting to
it plays on a grid.
Go over too long. It's a grid-based tactics type game, your Final Fantasy Tactics type of thing. Again, this being the kind of inspiration for that sort of thing when it came to that game. If it's the OgreBattle, it's a real-time strategy.
Well, no. It is non-RTS. So the OgreBattle games, the ones called battle games, are actually a very niche genre of gaming that not many other games actually use. And effectively what you do is you have squads moving in a real time on a large open map. This map, your character's squads can move in all directions, so they have no limitations. It's not any kind of gridlock. Upon meeting up with a obstacle or enemy, they get moved from the over map into a kind of usually it was a 3x3 like stationary grid, and the enemy also had a 3x3 stationary grid, and these grids would target each other's grids rather than moving around on a unified grid. Now the combats would play out without your input on how the characters fight, but you would choose how to compose your squad, and depending on where you put your squad would determine what kind of attacks your characters are going to do. So it's not to say that you didn't have any control. You had control over what your characters were capable of doing and what they were going to do in combat, but you didn't control them for the actual combat itself. That played out.
It's kind of essentially like setting up a program. You set it up to run a certain way, and then it goes and runs the way you set it up.
Yep. And I really like that, because it was this, all these games, you were either like first person or from the third person RTS, just like microing really crazy, but nothing really took a step back and let you be like the grand general and overview the whole thing from that kind of position.
And honestly, when it comes to it, one of the things that drew me to these games was, I know it's always interesting to talk about the illusion of choice in video games. This had a lot of those where, there's kind of two choices where it's just kind of a yes or a no to a simple thing. But it also had a lot of, like, big story-changing decisions, even if it's just you get different characters and thus different circumstances are afforded to you based on what you do.
Yeah, and usually there would be significant outcome changes, which was a lot more in line with kind of the actual, not any of the tactics games, which these tactic games still use it, but what I'm saying is, like, your decisions would usually break down into branching pathways, and you would get even more branching pathways that would lead to different ends. So it was very interesting for that time to have these kind of tactics games and battle games have these really branching stories. That wasn't very common in the tactics genre at the time.
Yeah, a lot of times it's just, you go through a series of maps, and occasionally you get a choice to recruit a character or not. But using Let Us Cling Together as an example, spoilers, so skip ahead a bit. At the end of the first chapter, you're given a choice to either follow some very, very evil, to some extent, orders, and kill 5,000 of your own people to blame it on the enemy and hope to rouse people to your side. And you can either agree to those orders or not. And depending on what you pick, the story drastically changes. And it all eventually converges back onto a certain point. But the journey you took to get to that point, and thus the lingering consequences, changed the whole story. Depending on choices you take, there are important characters who will turn out differently and die or end up on different sides.
Yes, I think the best example of that in OgreBattle 64 is Dio. From the very get-go, the things you say and respond to will drastically alter what Dio's role will be with you and without you.
That's from Let Us Cling Together. There's a character very much like Dio. They're if this game series had went on long enough for that to be a trope, they would have been the originators of the somewhat friendly character at the start who can either stay with you somewhat antagonistically or become an antagonist in their own right.
Yes, they were the champion that either butts heads with you or was your enemy.
And honestly, I feel like one of the other best things about the series, when it comes to its story, is they are interconnected.
Yep. All of the stories are branching upon each other.
You have characters from the first game, March of the Black Queen, that you will then see again in Let Us Cling Together or OgreBattle 64. And these recurring characters have their different story elements, along with some of the different things. Part of the canon ending for the first game is the establishment of this kingdom of Zenobia. And you see people from Zenobia in the next couple of games, as well as the antagonistic Lotus, which is sort of a theocratic empire that is been, to some extent, without knowing too much about the Gaiden of Princess Zenobia, they've been a factor in all the different games. I think the Knight of Lotus is where they get their biggest focus, and Zenobia isn't really talked about.
Yes, a lot of the time they're kind of just pushed off to the side, but they are the looming evil that threatens the many.
And even in the Game Boy Advance Tactics Ogre of the Knight of Lotus, it has a major story branch, and then it itself has a secret ending, which basically reveals the game as essentially the backstory of one of the major antagonists of Let Us Cling Together. And finding that secret ending so long after I had played the game initially, after having played Let Us Cling Together, and just being like, wait, so this is who this character is?
Yeah, in a way, it's kind of like one of those cork boards where you're piecing everything together and you're linking it. And the best part is, it's not chronologically the first game to the second game to the third game to the fourth game to the fifth game. They jump around. It's all over the place, and all of the information that you're getting has nothing to do with the order of the game's releases.
Yeah, and even then, there's hints and talks about backstory elements to these old wars, that things are now coming back to affect the story of these games, to the point that the first game released is talked about as this is the 5th chapter in the OgreBattle saga or whatever. with the next game released, Let Us Cling Together, being the 7th chapter, and then going back to the 6th in OgreBattle 64. I can't remember if there was a chapter given for the Night of Lotus. Like, I can look that up real quick.
Yeah, I don't believe it did, because the Night of Lotus and the Prince of Zenobia were both side stories, so they weren't part of like the official chapter for the chronology of the great story that they were making. So those two are kind of like interplaced between chapters.
Like, I'm sure if I found my cartridge and booted it up, there'd probably be some sort of explanation of like, this is like chapter 4.5 or this. But I know the story itself is set before the events of March of the Black Queen. Just going back to this talk about like secrets, you know, again, hitting that secret ending and finding out that, wait, this is the explanation of this character's life and kind of what led into them. And then for a little peek behind the scenes, I hurt my foot last week after the recording of the episode that's probably coming out to when we're recording this one. That night I hurt my foot, so I've been trapped, unable to do much to let my foot heal. So I've had time to be playing through the PSP version. And there's a secret character with a secret class in the PSP version of Let Us Cling Together that is notoriously hard to recruit. Would you like to hear the story, Brandon?
Oh, I would.
So, the character is the witch Deneb, who has, again, been in the games since the start and often appears in some form or fashion.
More often cameos in the latter games. That being said, she is literally just the tutorial assistant narrator for OgreBattle 64.
I know in the Night of Lotus game, she is the person who runs the like secret shop and is a secret recruitable. If you hire a generic, give her that name and a specific set of things, and then make her into a witch, she will turn into the special version of the witch instead of the normal one. In this game, however, specifically the PSP remake, I can't remember if you could recruit her in the SNES or PS1 versions, or if this is specifically a PSP version thing. But you recruit her by buying 5 of these elemental orbs from her shop, which you can only buy by auctioning off dragons of those specific elements, of which there are 9. You get 2 per dragon, so you need to auction off 27 dragons, 3 of each element, to be able to get the mission where that ends in you recruiting her. But wait, there's more. She has a secret unlockable class that you can only get if you sell 30 glass pumpkin items to her before you buy the last orbs.
Man, that sounds almost as bad as how hard it is to get the Dragoon in OgreBattle 64. The Dragoon is, like, throughout 3 of the 4 chapters, you are searching, backtracking, going all over the place, having to be at certain places at certain times that the game doesn't indicate at all, to like talk to these NPCs at these towns that give you hints to go do this thing, to get this thing, to go talk to this other NPC, to get the helmet, to get the spear, to get the armor. And then after you have all of that, you also have to have a character that meets the very tight requirements for what's required to make a Dragoon.
And these games are famous for stuff like that. I can't, don't quote me on this. I know in the original PSP version remake, there's like some equipable item you can get by getting to the 100th floor of this gigantic dungeon that's in the game called the Palace of the Dead. In the original versions, it was even harder because I don't think there were ways to save between floors. So you had to just play through it all. And, like, if you couldn't get to it and needed to, like, leave or go to bed, you just kind of had to leave it running.
And pray your batteries don't die.
And while the PSP remake allows you to save and other things like that, it also, through side stories and additional content, added more floors. I think it goes to like 125 now with the secret stuff. I don't know if you had to get to the end of the secrets or just the first so many to get to the 100th floor and get that item. But like send in a screenshot, and the company like made a certain number of like replicas of the special item you get, and the first so many people to reach the end of that dungeon and send them the screenshot, they sent them like this commemorative helmet.
Yeah, that dungeon was it was something.
It's fun. Totally.
Yep.
Totally not PTSD from farming, because again, you gotta get 30 of those glass pumpkins, of which only a few enemies drop them.
Oh, I want to tell a really good story about 64. So, OgreBattle 64, I don't know about you guys, but so I had a 64 cartridge. 64 cartridges are famous for wacky, zany things happening when they're starting to die. So I was playing 64, new file on one of my really old cartridges on the 64. Pop that sucker in, start up a new game. The first combat in the game that you partake in, all of the footmen were replaced with pumpkin heads. So, a little information on a pumpkinhead. Pumpkinheads are characters where their backline ability is they knock out 50% of your character's health automatically, and if they're in the front line, they do this barrage attack that will put your character at 1 HP. So, there's a lot of spearmen, these, little guys, in the front line in the first combat. They're some of the weakest units, and they're all being replaced by pumpkinheads. Which means all those pumpkinheads knocked my entire party down to 1 HP, and then their backline just kills me. First combat of the game, best thing ever. 64 cartridges, they're great.
And then sometimes you just with these games, sometimes you just have to wonder, was this a glitch of the cartridge, or was this some weird secret I accidentally uncovered?
I'm pretty sure it had to be a cartridge error, because I've had 3 cartridges for OgreBattle 64. None of them have ever had a Pumpkinhead glitch, anything like that. And this one, which was my oldest one, like, it was totally going, like, to the graveyard. You could tell. And when I popped that in, madness ensued in the game. I don't know how the code was even working. And after that, the cartridge was dead. It could not be played anymore.
These games, to some extent, I'd say they're criminally underrated.
They are criminally. They are okay. It's not an extent. They are underrated. So few of people actually have played and/or know about these games in the Ogre series. I'm not going to say they're the best games around, but they are very interesting games.
Because when it comes down to it, like, the person who created the series is the same person who then created Final Fantasy Tactics for the owners of that franchise at the time, who loved his game. And then, honestly, I feel when it comes down to it, people just kind of saw them, and a lot of people saw them at a time after a different series had released, which sort of never got to grab it. Like, when the first release in English was the PS1 version of Let Us Cling Together, and because it was the first remake of the SNES version, it came out after Final Fantasy Tactics, people thinking this was some company trying to cash grab, remake a popular concept, and thus felt it was a shallow imitation instead of what it was, which was the inspiration. Because they were both created by the same person.
Yep.
It's why you can look at Final Fantasy Tactics in these games and both go, hey, there's some really weird and convoluted secrets you can get access to. Let's talk about some of the hidden classes in other games.
Ah, man,
Like
Tactics, Beowulf. You ever get Beowulf in Tactics?
I never did.
Oh, man. Not intuitive at all. I think, so Cloud was in the newer version of Tactics, Final Fantasy Tactics to be specific, and he's a lot easier to get than Beowulf. Beowulf is just completely out in the boondocks. No reason you would ever find him without a guide, pretty much.
And that's kind of the whole thing. There are so many of these things that, you need some sort of guide to help you. Because I don't know how you're supposed to, figure out some of these mechanics. Heck, I'll go with a simple one that was especially broken in the Tactics games, especially Let Us Cling Together. Archery. In the Tactics games, there is a specific thing when it comes to certain the just regular bows, not crossbows, where you will click your attack and it'll show your attack radius. But based on your height relative to other opponents. And I feel your first experience with this will be seeing the attack range of an enemy archer, and you'll be like, I'm outside that. And then suddenly they'll shoot an arrow at your healer in your back line and be like, why were they able to target them? Well, it's because they're up on some hill, which gives certain amounts of extra range. Especially in Let Us Cling Together, where archers are some of your strongest units and can deal absurd damage from ranges.
I mean, to be perfectly honest, throughout all the Ogre series, archers seem to have been funded by the creators. They are probably one of the most powerful in all of the games.
I feel like the Knight of Lotus being the only one where archers were not utterly overpowered. Mm. They still had the ability to target outside, but I feel like their damage got lowered immensely. That game had other broken strategies, though. Reminds me of the time that game had some secret, basically just side dungeons you could do quick little things in for getting just random treasures by completing the map. And there was a specific one I remember because the boss of it, which was technically the only enemy you needed to beat, was the boss to end the map. You had the magic to teleport a character to the boss, and then you could unlock certain finisher moves, which would deal you damage, but do a very powerful attack on your enemy. And it was very easy to just one-shot this boss by teleporting a powerful character to them and defeating them quickly in just a couple of turns. These games I feel are famous, at least among us, for your ability to do that. And just find the ways to, whether it's a difficult encounter. Just there are so many strategies you can use to get through it.
Yeah, like a good example of this in 64's Battle Ogre is where there's this one boss. I think he's near the end of the first chapter or the start of the second. He has just some really, really powerful units, really powerful guys that are set up in his front and his back line. But the boss himself is really weak and he's in the center. So you can tell your units to target the boss and just get through it really, really quickly. Or you can try to kill the other guys and grind out more XP, and if you kill all of his units before you kill the boss, you get a secret item. But the thing is, those units, at this part of the game, if you haven't just been like grinding XP and doing everything you can to make your guys really strong, they will just like two-shot your characters. And that's like, you lose the guys and they're gone for good. They don't come back. They're gone. They're dead. Deleted. Anyways, we hope you guys enjoyed our rambling about the Ogre series as much as we go on about it. But I think at this point, we're going to call it here for tonight's conversation. So, thank you all for watching, and y'all have a good day.
If you can find these games, give them a try.
Guaranteed you'll enjoy them, whether you're enjoying the zaniness or the madness.